Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Beaumont. I'm head researcher at Centro de Tecnología para el Desarrollo. This is a non-profit organization based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And the topic of this paper is e-teaching strategies, massive versus customized methodologies. So let us start saying that when designing any educational process, we must analyze it and try to optimize it, taking into account all variables involved: curriculum design, didactic transposition, the learning environment, evaluation methodologies, etc. In the particular case of e-learning pedagogical processes, there is one particular scenario which is not present, at least in equal dimensions, in classroom teaching processes. This is the possibility of including within one particular course an enormous number of participants which would be impossible even to imagine in a classroom teaching process. This is where the concept of mass education appears, and with it the concept of massive open online courses, or MOOCs also known as. These methodologies of mass education may seem very attractive because of the volume of students who can be trained, but are very sensitive to environmental design, which can determine the success or failure of the process. On the other hand, we can see the results of personalized methodologies, in which the main instructor or coordinator or assistant interacts directly with each student and performs feedback on each of the work, inquiries or suggestions from them. The educational processes designed for distance learning or e-education programs rely basically on three major components: curricular design, teaching strategies, and e-education learning environments. So let us see each of these kind of briefly. The curricular design. What exactly is the core knowledge we wish to transmit? What should a student know, and what would be convenient for them to know? How do we choose the priority issues? We have to choose the appropriate content and structure it accordingly to be able to effectively communicate it and thus achieve a successful learning process. These are the main questions we have to start by asking ourselves when we are designing this curricular process. The central problem of any curriculum project is that of content, and in a more general sense, knowledge. The didactic transposition is the adaptive transformation process, whether it involves distortion, substitution, or creation of knowledge, by which scholarly knowledge constitutes itself in the knowledge or object to be taught, and in turn, knowledge or object actually taught. In second place, we have teaching strategies. Having selected the content, one must also choose appropriate teaching strategies to achieve the desired goal. In general, these teaching strategies can be classified as the teaching of organized forms of knowledge through direct intervention strategies, for example, exposition, interrogation, etc. Strategies focused on indirect forms of teacher intervention, for example, case studies, problem-based learning, inquiry. And in the third place, the skills training through simulation and control practice. Now let us just briefly go over the teaching strategies theories. The first of these can be considered behaviorism, which begins in the late 19th century in Russia, when Pavlov raises reflexology, arguing that behavior is a chain of reflections and learning is achieved by contiguity, association, and stimulus response. At the same time, in the US, John Watson and Skinner talk about a learning strategy where the teacher is active, selects the contents, doses the material in a relevant sequence. In the early 20th century, the Gestalt theory evolves in Germany. This theory relies mainly on perception, where the whole is more than the sum of the parts, and learning occurs by what is known as insight. The most important contribution of this theory is not that learning cannot be conceived as a phenomenon which is isolated of the environment and all of the other factors that influence the actors in the process. Constructivism emerged in the mid-20th century, around 50s or 60s, and its main exponents were Piaget, Vygotsky, and Brunner. This theory, in a general sense, states that the student is active, is adapting, works to resolve conflicts, overcomes limitations of knowledge, is interactive, conscious, and an active part of the learning process. Finally, there is cognitivism, a theory which speaks of meaningful learning and emerges in the 60s. Its main exponents were Ausubel and Novak. According to Ausubel, for meaningful learning to occur, it is necessary that the material presented to the student is not arbitrary, meaning that it possesses in itself meaning. A material has meaning if the elements are arranged and not merely juxtaposed, that is, if it has a meaningful structure to the student. Finally, having developed these strategies, feedback is crucial to achieve the educational process to create a system of continuous improvement in its implementation. For this, you must have an appropriate system of assessment of learning. Evaluation is a process of obtaining information and then making judgments and ultimately decisions. Regarding the usefulness of the evaluation, it helps students to learn about their progress in relation to the objectives, know their weaknesses, find their difficulties in order to overcome them, and compare their performance with that of their peers. From the point of view of the student, the evaluation is fused with learning. While it validates, it reorients. For teachers, evaluation helps to know the initial state of knowledge of students, the progress made by each of them, their difficulties, and finally being able to review the proposed objectives. Now, the third component is the e-education learning environments. Finally, an aspect that is also important is the channel that will be used to implement this learning. Since we now have efficient and economical information and communication technologies, which are increasingly accessible, this will enable us to deliver knowledge in a more effective way to increasing numbers of people. But we must remember that these are only channels and that the main importance is in the developed content. Let's see something about student feedback on technology in e-education learning environments. Feedback from the participants plays obviously an important role to improve different aspects such as curricular design, methodology, evaluation, etc. As well as taking note of spontaneous feedback from online students, we have conducted a number of surveys among these participants so as to understand their particular needs as far as learning environments and the use of information technology in their homes or workplaces. Some relevant issues that arose from a recent survey conducted in 2015 include issues like: one of the most frequent complaints from online students is the availability of tutors or coordinators to be able to answer inquiries and assist students in general problems. Another issue occurring in some e-learning platforms is that some students find it difficult to locate the learning material. When there are many different files, for example video, text, presentations, also located in different places of the websites, it is relatively frequent that they skip some of them, and thus this interferes with the correct learning process. Also, automated inscription to courses, as opposed to direct email communication, has proven to be a problematic issue for some potential participants. Although email communication has also presented some problems, as a number of other prospective students have mentioned the problems of, for example, spam block in some educational institutions. That means that legitimate inquiries are treated as spam. Well, summing up on regards of time restraint, we can say that whereas information technology has provided us with a fabulous meaning of providing education, we cannot ignore the point that this is merely the channel used for delivering the process and not an ultimate goal in itself. Technology is of huge importance, but the main focus must be placed on curricular design and teaching strategies. In the particular case of e-learning pedagogical processes, there is one particular scenario which is not present in classroom teaching processes. This is the possibility of including this enormous number of participants, which could not be possible in a face-to-face personal environment. Whereas these methodologies of mass education may seem very attractive because of the volume of students who can be trained, they are very sensitive to environmental design, which can determine the success or failure of the process. For example, a couple of years ago, there was a course based on the platform called Novoed, where over 110,000 students enrolled in a mock organized by the Catholic University of Chile and Stanford University regarding strategic decision making, and really less than 10% of the students involved actually completed the course. So whereas a lot of students are very eager to enter these massive open online education processes, the success rate is quite low compared to other methodologies. Because on the other hand, we can see the results of personalized methodologies in which the main instructor or coordinator or assister interacts directly with each student and performs feedback on each of the work, inquiry or suggestions. Obviously, this requires much more effort, but the results today still seem far superior. Thank you very much, and do not hesitate to contact me by email for any inquiry or suggestion or comment. Thank you very much for listening.